I mean, I have like 300-ish friends on Facebook. But,
close friends on Facebook.
you know,
Then this gets
one of them is the wild board too, so
And here it is.
Woo! I should have worn my jacket.
This reminds me of the river trip.
Oh, Oops. Exactly what we observed. Nice drawing. Nice drawing.
And what about running big river?
Not the way it goes.
I know.
Could be.
Could be a really big one.
Alright, so I'm gonna just get this.
See on the other side of the river.
Wow.
I didn't know there were waves.
Why does it say rated M for mature? Because I'm hoping I'll be mature by this point.
Yay!
If you have on cell phone or something and you don't have it on vibrate silent, please be sure to put vibrate silent so we do not interrupt the presentation. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, his phone rings.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's his accident.
Yeah, fair.
What if he picks up, he's
It's on the
like,
list. It's on the rubric.
What?
really?
Are you serious? What's on the road?
Yeah.
Yes. If your phone rings, that's an automatic does not meet your app. It's on the rubric. You guys see it. It's in bold italics. Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon. I want to welcome you to the senior exhibition of Noah Scott Goldman. So I've had Noah in my advisors for the last 2 years. Unfortunately, I never actually had him in my class. But even though I had him in my advisory all that time, and from my conversations and the things that I hear from all his other sub-teachers, I know that he's an amazing student. You all know, probably if you're here, because he's also an amazing mathematician. When I think about Noah, it reminds me of a story. When I was in graduate school at Stanford, we had a guy who was from MIT too. He was a course 6, everything at MIT is a number, which is computer science. But he was in a bio lab, because I'm a biologist and he's in a bio thing, and he had to do lab meeting. And he got up at his lab meeting, and then he proceeded to explain to us, like, through his protein modeling that he did. But it was nothing but equations, and this and that and the other. And my professor, the Stanford professor, raised her hand and said, I was told there would be no math. That will not be the case today. I guarantee you that there will be math, but we have this wonderful gentleman here to explain the language of math to us mere mortals. And without much further ado, we'll just give a brief outline. He's going to talk at length about his last 2 years' experience here at Wildwood. After he's done speaking, then we'll open up to a round of questions and comments from faculty and staff. And then after we're done, then friends, family, and everyone else who's gathered can then, of course, say what they want to say. We will then take a brief little recess where those of us who are faculty and staff step out, and then come back in with nothing but hopefully wonderful kudos and congratulations to Noah for a great exhibition. So,
Assuming no cell phones go off.
yes. Please, no. No? Thank you, Joma.
Wasn't expecting there to be a podium, but so my fellow Americans, welcome to my senior exhibition. So this is going to be a lot like any other school presentation, in that, you know, I was really stressed out about it leading up to it, and it will also be not like a school presentation in that it's 45 minutes long and it's about me instead of anything interesting, and it's and I didn't do everything the night before this time. So there will be a question that's going to, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, there's going to be a question that's guiding the majority of this exhibition, and every picture that I put up like this is going to have some kind of pun, so just bear with me because I love puns. The one here, of course, is that fish oil, omega-3, essential fatty acid. Please let me graduate. My essential question is, how do I balance my obligations, wishes, and worries? And the way that I define these is a little different from their everyday usage. So I'm defining obligations, we mathematicians love specific definitions, as things for which there's some external motivation for me to do. Anything I have to do is an obligation. I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have to get my work done, attend to my extracurriculars, and schedule time for all of this. Wishes are things for which there is an internal motivation for me to do. You know, I want to have quality interpersonal relationships, friendships, family, girlfriends, well, girlfriend. You know, time alone, time to do math, stuff like that. And then a worry is basically any constraint that affects how I get to go about achieving these things. Limits on my options, if you will. So things like deadlines, resource constraints, future plans, my health and well-being, and other people's health and sanity. So these are all things that are very hard to weigh at times for me. They require a lot of, I guess you'd call it executive skills. And in the past, this has often been quite a challenge for me. I actually have ADHD, so it's difficult for me to concentrate on a lot. It's difficult for me to concentrate on any one thing for a very long time without tremendous personal effort. So that's something that I've been working on. And I want to talk about this concept of flow because it's when I'm able to achieve this state of mind that I'm able to do my best work. So Wikipedia defines flow as the mental state of operation in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process of the activity. It's also called being in the zone. And in X-Men First Class, they called it focus, but they said it was the point between serenity and rage. And the great thing about flow is that it's defined when you are taking on some kind of challenge, and your skill level is just high enough that you're able to go after it, but not so high that it becomes trivial or unnecessary. That's where flow is. And the great thing about flow is that if you constantly strive for it, you'll have to keep upping your skill level because obviously the first time you do a challenge is going to be very different from the nth time you do it. Because the more you do something over and over again, the less difficult it becomes. So you're always pushing the boundary of your comfort zone. And the goal for me is to strive for flow in as many sectors of my life as possible. So we're going to move into, so we had to select classes to talk about in depth, and then classes that were breadth classes, which we'll spend a little less time on. The pun here is that this is a starfish from the depths of the ocean. So the way I selected my depth classes was I looked for areas where I can already easily achieve flow, or at least I appear to. Ones that I enjoy very much, and ones to which I can make some kind of meaningful contribution, something that I am proud of and that I think will have a lasting impact in some way. The thing is, all these criteria are actually things I want to achieve in every area of my life. It's just that these areas for which I've had the most success with these criteria. So I'm hoping that by looking at them, we'll be able to move that to other areas. So we'll start with mathematics. If you didn't expect this was going to be a depth class, please get out. So I have a very strong personal connection to mathematics that really started in 9th grade. So I was actually, at that time I was reasonably competent in math, but I didn't really see it as something to be enjoyed before then. And now it's something that I do naturally. It feels more like a wish than an obligation. There's a lot of internal there's a lot of pleasure I get out of doing math, and it's also something that I really want to do in the future. I want to be a math professor. I want to Like what I tell everybody is that I want to wear the tweed jacket and have the calculator holster, everything like that. And so I actually couldn't quote this because this was something Alton told me that Terrence Tao said when he met him on his bike. So math is like climbing a mountain. It's hard work, but the higher you go, the more you can see. And also, the first people who try to go up the mountain usually die. And I would add on to this that, and I did not come up with this with this idea either. It's not original to me, but it was Louis Joel Mordell who said, "Nowadays, any tourist can be hauled up for a small fee without much difficulty." And my hope is to be the person operating the cable car. So this is actually an example of, I guess if you're going to continue with the analogy, it's an example of where the cable car crashed and burned and there was a major lawsuit. So my hope was that when I did the actual climbing on this project, there was an integration project for the unit. This was from Calc 2, where there were just a lot of problems to be done, and I wanted to go above and beyond that, and I wanted to look at something really theoretical. And there was this definition, there was this other kind of integral, this alternative definition that still captured the intuition of like you're approximating the area under a curve using rectangles, and the smaller the rectangles get, the better your approximation is. There was this alternative mathematical formulation of that I wanted to explore. And I actually learned a lot about that. The problem came when I tried to teach that to the class. So rather than starting with by saying, well, what do we think of when we think of an integral? We think of rectangles and areas. Instead, I just started by saying, so an open ball is the set of all points within a certain distance from, and like, you know, all this stuff that you really didn't see the value of when you first walked in. I was telling people what a BV partition was and what epsilon regular meant, and that they didn't really see where I was going until it was too late and they had already forgotten like the first 5 definitions that I had taught them. So the lesson here is that when teaching, intuition should precede theory, and this was really towards the beginning of my, I guess you could say, mathematical teaching career. And I've been trying to improve upon this. So this is actually not entirely related to teaching, but my hope is that you'll understand this. So this is something that I've been doing sort of on my own, sort of in conjunction with my studies in linear algebra. So what I have is 3 different quantities that are changing, and their change is described by these 3 equations. They're rules that say, okay, if the rate of change is this equation on the right side. And the funny thing is, these equations don't actually involve anything oscillating. There are no sines or cosines within the actual expressions themselves. Nothing going up and down. All the functions in there either increase forever, decay towards 0, or are just lines. And yet you can find solutions, you can find ways of changing these quantities that satisfy these equations that are actually oscillating. So what I've been trying to understand is, how does this behavior arise? Like, where did it come from? It's certainly not visible in the equations. And also, what conditions what initial conditions, like how do I have to start the quantities in order to get them to oscillate? Because they don't always oscillate. So I'm still looking for an answer to this question, and I hope to pursue it in the future. And I also want to talk about flow, because I did say that my depth classes were areas where I could easily achieve flow. So this is a video from Alton's elective where I had to prove, I had just looked at a proof of something called the exchange theorem. And Alton said, okay, now I'm going to take a video of you proving it. And I was like, but I don't understand the proof yet, really. And he said, I know, exactly, you're going to parse through it on camera. And there's a particular moment of realization that I want to show you. So, because we can solve this in terms of these, and therefore all the vectors that we form are going to use this to express. We can now express with the expression of this.
Change part.
Yeah. That's what that's called?
Yes.
Oh.
Exchange process. Yeah.
That's helpful. That explains the name. That's why this is called the exchange.
Yes. There you go.
So that was when I realized what the name actually meant, was you were exchanging one vector for another vector in this, anyway, that was an example of an aha moment. That's what's really important. And so I've been trying to bring these aha moments to other people. So my other depth area is internship, and for 2 years I've been working at the same internship / CI, which is at Virginia Avenue Park. This is a place where students at Santa Monica elementary schools can come and get help with their homework, and just in general get food and a supportive environment. And I've been kind of their mathematics consultant because lately, in the wake of the establishment of the Common Core standards, there have been a lot of books attempting to adhere to the standards and not really succeeding very well because they're new. And so you get all these weird problems that have peculiar methods of multiplication that are not really well understood by the staff, who were educated back when you only learned like one method of multiplication. So what they do is they say, Noah, what is going on here? And I usually say, I don't know, but let me look it up and figure it out. That's been a lot of fun for me, because it's kind of like a puzzle, figuring out how exactly these new methods are similar to the old ones, and how I can then teach them to the elementary schoolers. And I've actually been pretty successful. Over the summer, they don't have homework, so I've been running I ran a bi-weekly math curiosity session, where I would essentially just introduce them to concepts in a hopefully fun, interactive way. I taught them about means, medians, and modes with plastic fruit, and which I thought of on the spot, actually. I just grabbed the nearest bin of stuff and said, oh, this would be a great way for them to learn a lot about statistics. So I think my role here is best encapsulated by this email reflection I wrote in November of 2013, which was 11th grade. I like to think that my main job is to stimulate their brains, keep them on their toes, and show them exactly how and why everything works from the ground up. In a way, I'm half storyteller and half tutor. And I've often said that, well, a lot of math professors whose works I've read, they've said our dream is to be able to teach our students from the ground up, from addition all the way to whatever subject we happen to be teaching. And this has given me a lot of insight into the various parts of the actual education process. So I'm living a 12th of the dream, I guess you could say. So another area where I wrote about my internship was actually in my college essay. I actually got waitlisted at this school, and now that I look at this college essay, I realize it's because I did not answer the prompt at all. So I'm not going to tell you the prompt because it's just embarrassing how poorly I do really think this essay has a lot to say about this work. So in my first year of volunteer tutoring, I met a 5th grade boy named Bryant who wouldn't do his math homework because he preferred to talk to the other kids. The staff sat him at his own table, which helped other kids concentrate, but Bryant would still not finish until long after sunset. One day I told Bryant soon after he arrived that we were going to get his homework done within an hour. Good luck, he said cynically. No, we are going to turn you into a lean green math machine by the end of this year, I said in my half-professor, half-superhero sidekick voice. Kiss your homework troubles goodbye. I actually talk like this around kids. Thenceforth, Brian became my student. He worked in spurts, finishing 5 problems at a time before getting distracted. So I proposed a deal. After every 5 problems, you can ask me 1 question, then get back to work. That got him going. Beneath his restlessness, he had an aptitude for mathematics, and his questions were fantastic. Do you watch The Walking Dead? How do you talk to girls? Will you draw me zombies on motorcycles? Brian's homework time eventually stabilized at a mere 40 minutes, making me incredibly proud. My favorite math teachers had always emphasized that aptitude came from effort, and Brian's transformation into a lean green math machine was no different. Out of his struggles and meanderings, he had emerged stronger, and I, his teacher, was honored to have pointed the way. So, good encapsulation of my role there and my relationship with it. You know, it's really mostly for the kids, and I'm just happy to be able to observe that process. So we're going to move on to bread, which has the word bread in it. So there's bread. All right. So this is a very long segue into literature, and it basically I want to talk a little more about flow. So I said this to an extent before. Flow allows you to grow because it forces you to grow in order to keep maintaining it. Like, in order to have something, you can't have something be perpetually challenging, so you always have to seek new challenges, new problems, or new ways of looking at old problems. And all of this requires effort, work, which is what separates us from the moles who strive for mediocrity. I don't know any moles personally, but in the game Earthbound, they all think they're the 3rd strongest, actually. So the funny thing is, I actually wrote a paper on this. And the funny thing about this paper was that I was really all the parts of the writing process were kind of happening simultaneously all throughout the 3 weeks that I was working on it. And the brainstorming process was just me realizing, like, okay, something about this book, something about this world is making me uncomfortable, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Like, how do I express that? And it turned out that my problem with it was that nobody was really trying hard to look at anything beyond their immediate narrow focus that was imposed upon them. No one was looking for new problems or challenges. And so the difficulty in formulating the thesis was then, how do I express that these people are being total moles, like in a concise, expressive way? And then what evidence do I have of this? How do I fit that into an argument that builds to a resounding conclusion? Because one thing we were really working on in literature was an argument that built. You know, not just necessarily these are my 3 points, but my second point builds off my first point, and my third point builds off my second point, and then it's a crescendo to a big I can't sing. So my thesis ended up being pretty long. So I'll read it out loud, and then as I move through the points, it'll become more clear what this meant, because it is quite dense. So, because its imposition of emotional detachment and material satisfaction runs counter to humanity's naturally progressive and resilient mindset, the society presented in Brave New World, though appealing on the surface, cripplingly devalues the constant quest for meaningful engagement that gives rise to every major accomplishment of the human race, including, ironically, the world state. Basically, solving problems is what makes us human, and we had to do that to establish this big civilization that would allow us to ignore our problems. So if it's teaching us to ignore our problems, like, you can't do that. So the first part of my argument was just, you know, people are distracting themselves from their problems. They don't want to solve them directly. And my evidence was the head of the world state talking about the role of this drug, soma, in facilitating that. Then, in my next one, I had to prove that that practice was leaving room for problems to remain unaddressed. So then my evidence was that the one character was unable to address the fact that she was in love with another character. And then finally, the third point was that people's natural drive towards action, the fact that they can't resolve their issues, makes them unhappy. They feel stifled. And this character, Helmholtz, had an artistic need that wasn't being met because he was unable to address that. And so, in conclusion, I guess I should just read this out loud. So, all great human endeavors arose from problem solving, not problem denial. Historians even attribute the rise of civilizations to agriculture because the satiation of physical needs provided by a stable food source allowed people to devote more time to pondering important questions and solving vital problems. In other words, the dawn of civilization was characterized by an increase in the capability and willingness of people to seek solutions. Under this mindset, the world state, which advocates complacence and self-medication in lieu of decisive action, could only be called the opposite. So, anyway, I share this essay because it's a really, it wasn't a perfect essay, but there were some, it's a very concise encapsulation of my views on engaging and seeking to do new things. And most importantly, on facing the uncomfortable if necessary, as long as it isn't a threat to your well-being. Now, this is all very good in theory, but as we see in Hamlet, sometimes when you have to face your problems are really problematic. So Hamlet actually struggles with taking action throughout most of the play because, like, how do you take action against incest, murder, espionage, madness, betrayal, revenge, love, I guess? I'm trying to think of all the essential questions from 11th grade. So, anyway, where do you start when you're facing something that big? And it turns out it's not easy. But there's another subject that's really devoted to tackling difficult problems, and that's human rights. Specifically, it tackles difficult problems in a societal context, and and a lot of the questions have to do with effort and morality. So, what issues should we address, and why, and then how? And the conclusion that I drew from working on this was that we had two projects. We had to write two position papers, one of which was on our philosophy of human rights, and one of which was on the actual how well has our philosophy been implemented. So in the philosophy paper, I took the position that the basic unit of good is goal accomplishment. Whenever accomplishment is achieved, then that's yay, that's a good thing. And the reason that anything can be bad is because it will not maximize goal accomplishment. So if you kill someone, you're taking away their ability to accomplish goals in the future, so that drainage outweighs the accomplishment of killing someone. So, and the other thing I realized was that all individuals have unique goals, and not every goal is considered equally important. And the effort you spend on any goal should take into account all the priorities, and in particular for a society, all the individual's priorities. What ideally, now in practice that's a little more difficult because you'd have to have like a weighted voting system, but this is just my philosophy. And then in my outlook paper, I decided that, I said that human rights are any goals that are deemed essential for everyone. Like, they're required to optimize human potential. So things like education, you need to be educated in order to live in our modern society. And then upholding them is not always easy because the upholders don't always have all the resources. Giving out free food to people isn't a very profitable endeavor, even though it is a morally right endeavor. So, if you want an example of this, goal system, this is the math part, by the way. But it's really simple. It's just addition and division. So what you do is you list all your goals. These are the three that I don't eat, actually. This is just to keep it simple. So what I did was I ranked these on a scale from 0 to 1. So I ranked schoolwork as being maybe more important than social life, and math obviously gets the highest score. And then I add them all up, and then what I do is I divide each one by the total. So 0.160 is about 0.315 divided by that total there. And ideally those should add up to 1. And so what this tells me is how much of my time and energy I should spend on each thing. So I should spend maybe 16% of my time with other people. And more than half of my time doing that. So, now obviously I made that using internal motivation, my own personal interest or wish level as a measure. I didn't really take into account the external obligation part of it. So really externally schoolwork is probably more important than math. It's funny, for a lot of people they're synonymous, but you know, I'm a special snowflake, I guess. And so what I've noticed in the past is that one thing that's given me a lot of difficulty with ADHD is that I tend to weight the internal more heavily than the external. And so when I'm being impulsive, I tend to, you know, not get my work done because I want to do math. And so my question is, how should I adjust my priorities to compensate for the fact that I weight the internal more heavily than the external? And it turns out we studied this in MUSH. Specifically, we studied the economics unit. That's my dad, he's an economist. And roughly, in a very crude analogy, this wish or interest level, if you see me as being the producer of effort, I suppose, supply roughly corresponds to wishes or interests, and a demand. In other words, like supply means I want to do this because I have an interest in it. Like I will make money if I supply this. I will make this much money if I supply this. And then obligation is demand. So all of those consumers out there just telling you what to do. Like that's what an obligation is like. I need to do this because people are on my case about it. And in economics, what you do is you find the equilibrium point. The intersection that satisfies both the conditions of supply and demand. In terms of my, in terms of
just listen to your dad.
in terms of my essential question, what that means is incorporating wishes into obligations. So killing two birds with one stone, finding ways of streamlining that process. So an example of this is actually in my economics jackdaw. So what I did was I found ways of incorporating the requirements while also emphasizing my interests. So the requirements were basically teach a lesson about economics and involve the class as much as possible. My interests included things like emergence and systems theory, and I'm also interested in education, so I was hoping to use some active education strategies, which actually worked really well for this assignment. And in other words, achieving my wish meant fulfilling my obligation. And so by changing the way that I looked at this assignment, it made me more, not just made me more likely to do it, but also do it well. And that was, I was very proud of this lesson because I was able to teach people rather mathematical concepts in ways that involved discussion and got them excited about it. So actually one class that blends work with play really well is Advanced Topics in STEM. Recently the institute that runs this has been named by a name that I created, which is WIZARD, the Wildwood Institute for STEM Research and Development, and that's a wizard. And so, yeah, like I said, this is a perfect example of work blended with play. I got to choose my project based on what I was interested in, math. And the great part of this was that I could work on what I loved, but I also got to see what it was like to do independent research and live basically like a math professor, surrounded by intelligent people who are interested in things, not necessarily exactly the same things, but related enough that we can bounce ideas off of each other. So my actual project that I worked on in this class was, it looks rather complicated, but essentially what I was doing was I was looking for operations that obeyed similar rules to ordinary arithmetic. So something that behaved like the plus sign in that if you switch the order it doesn't matter, or if you move the parentheses it doesn't matter. But it wasn't the plus sign. And what I eventually came up with was, so if you draw this curve, the curve, by the way, is just, I call it Noah's function. It's just arbitrary. Don't think this is in any way special. You could do this with a lot of different curves, but this one's just better. So, so what I did was I said, okay, here's how you would add 3 plus 10. You find 3, you draw the height of the curve at 3. You find 10, you draw the height of the curve at 10. You put them end to end. You find out where the curve attains that height, and that position on the number line is the sum. So 3 plus 10 is 27.54704, not 13. So, and it works because you can see that it doesn't matter how I stack the arrows, like what order I do that, I still get to the same height, which means I'm going to get to the same position on the x-axis. So it obeys the same rules as addition. It's more difficult to show multiplication visually because you need some way of turning the multiplication you usually do with rectangles. So you'd have to find some way of converting a rectangle into a height, which isn't really as easy to do visually, but you could do it. And then subtraction is where you turn the arrows upside down, so you come back. Anyway, those worked, and I was able to investigate a lot of really cool stuff. I'm trying to define calculus in terms of these operations and geometry and distance and topology, all kinds of things. It's really fascinating. So I actually asked Scott's, I don't know why I asked permission, but this is Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, I'm safe because of the law of conservation of energy. This pendulum won't hit me, and then it hit him in an outtake. And it's a perfect example of things not really working out the way that you expect them to. And so that's what I mean when I say science is not an exact science. I don't mean that it's not precise. I don't mean that it's not based on data or experimentation. What I mean is that that doesn't necessarily happen in a linear order. You oftentimes do just exploratory experimentation where you kind of assess the situation and say, okay, what hypotheses can I make about this data that I'm looking at? And then sometimes you go out and you run an experiment and it doesn't work, and you say, okay, I have to go back and modify my hypothesis, and then I'll try this experiment, and then you're constantly tweaking things. That's really what I took out of physics was, especially during a lot of the projects where there was no preset procedure. A lot of what we had to do was just tweaking. Even in projects that didn't involve experimentation, like this class lesson project, there was a lot of tweaking involved. So this is about the most mathematical topic I could pick, really, which is Lagrangians in phase space. And these are mathematical tools for doing physics that allow you to turn physical problems into mathematical problems with relative ease, without necessarily relying on Newton's laws of motion, because sometimes X, Y, and Z aren't the most convenient variables to work with, especially if you have to introduce like sines and cosines. So the great thing about this project was that it was kind of my own personal, I guess, triumph over the problems that I had with the original integration project. You'll notice there's not a lot of math in this first part of the lesson notes. There is math later, but this is mostly just intuition. So I talk about the assumptions that are made when you're doing Newtonian mechanics, that motion is smooth, nothing is teleporting anywhere, that motion is deterministic, so whenever you start with the same input, you'll get the same output. If I drop the ball from the same location, it will fall in the same way. And then I moved on to talking about the mathematical tools that we use to describe this. And I think the feedback that I got from my audience was that it was really, they did understand what I was saying, and they did. I think one thing that was really appreciated that I actually didn't expect to be that appreciated was the fact that I did derive Newton's second law of motion from a Lagrangian, and Marshall Hanning was like, that was really cool. And I said, oh wow, I didn't really expect you guys to like that much. So that was pretty gratifying to the ego. Chemistry is another science class, and I did take honors chemistry. It was probably the most demanding honors class that I've ever taken, and but to use a phrase coined by Alton Price, it made me cry in a good way. So it did require a lot of time and energy, and it stretched my organization skills to the limit, and it also, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about the scientific processes, and what helped me a lot was actually translating them into mathematics, because that's something that I understand really well. The other part of this that was difficult was the lab portion, because as you know, mathematicians don't really work with that many dangerous chemicals, and so that was something that was really new to me. This is probably the most lab work I've done in a class, even more so than I think my 10th grade biology class. Like we were in the lab almost every day. So the honors, my honors chemistry project, the original, the one that was kind of a free choice project. I picked an original idea, which was, when I say original, I don't necessarily mean inventive, I just mean that it hadn't been done before to my knowledge. And, you know, in retrospect, probably why it wasn't entirely finished by the time that I gave the science night presentation, or rather that I hadn't been able to draw any meaningful conclusions from it. But I think in terms of learning, this project was rather successful, because my goal was to measure the Lewis acidity of bismuth, which meant I had to understand all these relationships about electrons and thermochemistry and things that I hadn't really worked with before. There was a lot of Google searching and Wikipedia involved, and it happened to coincide also with the project that Owen was doing with the game design club. So I actually had to do thermodynamics consulting for them, so that furthered my project a little more. Anyway, it did involve a lot of lab work too, and I actually remember I had to order some oxalic acid for one experiment, and so I walked in to Tim's room carrying this bag of white powder and said, "Tim, I got this great deal on acid on Amazon.com." Hi Scott, that was a good time to walk in. And I'd say, you know, although it's not really worth publishing a paper about, I would say that it was one of the biggest learning experiences of probably my scientific career, because like I got to understand how things could all happen at the same time. Like you have to tweak. You often have to tweak a lot, and it's not necessarily a linear progression from question to conclusion. In terms of the laboratory work, I was lab partners with Rachel Hansen, and I learned that mathematicians and scientists are not really, they don't really do the same jobs, because as I said, you know, we don't really use anything more dangerous than a pencil. But a similarity is that it's important to see them both in action. So when you're in the lab, it's a lot like playing around with a theorem, in that you're seeing how the theory can show you what's going to happen in real life, and how real life can show you what's going to happen in theory. Now, of course, there was a lot to balance during this process. So, you know, you're obligated to learn something because it is school. You have to do things in a way that is efficient, and you have to be able to connect this back to the theory. So you have to be thinking about all of that. A lot of walking back and forth between the lab sheet and the experiment. I wanted it to be, my wish was efficiency, because I wanted to be done and go back home as soon as possible. And my worries were that it was rather difficult. There were deadlines, and of course I didn't want to kill anyone. So that meant I had to be really conscientious about really laying everything out in front of me and understanding what I did, what I needed to do before jumping straight into it. So this is something that I say around the house often quite loudly. So in Spanish 4 to an extent, and really a lot in Spanish 5, we started to move beyond grammar. We were using Spanish in context, so using it as a tool to understand things like art, history, and culture, and then of course using what we know about and analyzing art, history, and culture to understand the Spanish language and learn new vocabulary. We also took over Susan's room a lot because we watched a lot more movies in Spanish 5 than I think any other class I've ever taken, which I am not complaining about. Please keep that. I love watching movies. So I'm going to talk through a portion of a project I did on the inventor of algebra, who he was an Arab, and he lived in the vicinity of Al-Andalus, which is in the Iberian Peninsula. Él vivió desde 708 hasta 850 y escribió el compendio de cálculo por compleción y comparación, y era el primer libro que usó métodos de hacer acciones a los dos lados de una ecuación en vez de usar argumentos de geometría. So basically what I said was this was the first person who thought of the idea of doing something to both sides of an equation, or like both sides of a problem, I guess you could say, rather than just using geometric arguments to solve problems. So advisory this is actually Jonah's email picture. I didn't have to look very hard. So this is probably everyone's favorite class, in the same way that recess was. Well, not. That's a little mean. I would say I would say it's everyone's favorite class because it's safe and comfortable. It's a good way to start the morning. Everyone loves consultancy. Everyone loves connections. But it is a class, and we have done some really rather meaningful work in advisory, things like multicultural lessons and CMI, and of course conferences and exhibitions like I'm doing right now. And when you look at all of this, you see that advisory is really about your place in your real life community. It's about relating to other people and examining your own growth and seeing how you can better yourself and live in harmony with other people. That's what all those multicultural lessons are about. That's what connections is about. Being a happy, well individual. I love puns, and I also love lies, so there's no pun in this picture. I lied. This is just a picture of a building at Carleton. So, my college process was...
610.
So...
Sorry, guys. Potentially without.
So my college process was basically my, I guess, super strategy was to give people lots of information about me and then make it entertaining so they don't realize how boring I am, like this presentation. And that meant I wrote a lot of essays about a lot of rather unrelated topics. I'm going to read the cocaine essay because otherwise you'll all be really weirded out. But yeah, I wrote about things like cocaine, my love of math. I wrote about